The first parameter we have is the parameter for number of tracks. Here we can choose the default number of tracks that PractiCAD will start whenever we go to run a specific vane. For example, here we're going to say that the number of tracks is going to be 3. And then we're going to hit the save key. When we exit out of the library icon, if we come over to the radius vanes in our accessory panel and then click on a fitting, once we click and pick the vane of our choice, whatever we have chosen for number of tracks will be the default count for vanes here in the radius vanes field. Now obviously you can change the number of count after it's been placed on the drawing. However, the number of tracks is simply the default count you're going to get when you first attach a radius vane to a fitting. The second parameter we're going to cover is the ability to choose your track radius calculation method. Currently, PractiCAD offers 3 methods for calculating the spacing between vanes automatically. They are equal distance, radius proportional, and width proportional. The first one we're going to cover is equal distance. When you choose the calculation method equal distance, PractiCAD is going to take the available space between the throat and the heel and divide it by your track count or number of tracks. It's then going to make sure that the spacing between each vane is equal. Therefore, the spacing between the throat of the elbow and vane 1 will be equal to the spacing between vane 1 and vane 2 and vane 3, and so on. That can be represented here just by looking at the current preview. The second method we have for the radius calculation is the radius proportional method. Now when we go to choose the radius proportional method, we must also choose the proper track radius ratio value that works for us. In this particular tutorial, we're going to demonstrate the radius proportional method utilizing the radius ratio 0.85. So we're going to save, and we're going to now add vanes to the drawing and show you how utilizing this ratio, PractiCAD will calculate the spacing between vanes automatically for us. We're going to exit out of the library. We're then going to go over to the radius vane icon. We're going to click on it. We're going to click on the fitting we'd like to place vanes in. You can see here we've already got the PCAD vanes selected. And now we've got 3 track radiuses that have automatically been calculated for spacing. And there's 3 here because we chose the number of tracks to be 3. To show you how these values were created, we're going to open up a notepad and show you the formula. The formula for radius proportional, it is calculated by the following. You take the radius of the fitting, you divide it by the radius ratio, and that will be the track radius 1. For example, what we're going to do is we're going to take the calculator. We have a fitting on the drawing. The radius of the fitting happens to be 36. So we're going to put that value into our calculator. If we divide that by the radius ratio, which for this tutorial is going to be 0.85, and then we hit equals, you can see that the track 1 radius should be 42.35. And if you come over here into the radius vanes field, you can see under 1 track radius, it's 42.35. Now to calculate the spacing of the second one, all we do is take the track 1 radius and divide that by the radius ratio. So you can see here in the formula, track radius 1 divided by radius ratio will equal track radius 2. So all we're going to do is take the calculator here and divide the number we've got for the track radius 1 by the radius ratio, which is 0.85, and we're going to hit equals. When we do that, you can see that track radius 2 should be 49.826. And if you come over here, you can see that we have the track radius 49.82. So it's doing it correctly. To calculate the third, we're just going to do the same thing again. For calculation of track 3, we take track 2 radius divided by the radius ratio. So already we've got track 2 radius in the calculator. We're just going to divide it by 0.85, which is our radius ratio, and we're going to hit equals, and then it's going to show us the track 3 radius, 58.61, which will be in 6.2 when we round it up. So over here we have track radius 68.62. So once again, if we just divided this by 0.85, or the radius ratio again, it would show us what the value of track 4 would be if we added it. It should be 68.96. So here we're just going to raise the count up to 4, and you can see that it's automatically utilizing that calculation, the radius proportional track calculation method, and it's calculating a 68.96 radius. So this is how to use the track calculation method for radius proportional. The third track radius calculation method that PractiCAD offers is the method width proportional. The width proportional method is going to factor in the width of the radius elbow into choosing what the proper spacing is. It's also going to require that you choose the proper track radius ratio that you would like to use for your drawing. If you have never used this calculation method before, you'll probably want to make sure that you find the track radius ratio that suits you best. In this particular tutorial, we're going to choose 0.25 just to demonstrate how it chooses the spacing for us. We're going to hit Save key. We're going to exit out. We have it set as width proportional. 0.25 is the radius ratio. We're going to exit out of library. Now what we're going to do is click on the radius vane. We're going to click on our fitting. And PractiCAD, because we've already got the PCAD vane selected, as you can see here, it's calculated 3 tracks for us based on our default number of vanes, or default track count. So we're now going to show you how it came up with these radiuses for the first 3 vanes you see. To calculate the track 1 radius, PractiCAD, when you're on the width proportional formula, is following the formula you see here. Width proportional is calculated by, and here you can see it says track 1 is the radius of the fitting. Currently, that happens to be 27. And you add that to the width of the fitting, which in this particular tutorial is currently 36. And you multiply the width of the fitting times the radius ratio. So if you take width of fitting, we're going to use the calculator. Width of fitting is 36, so we put 36 in here. And we multiply that by the radius ratio, which is 0.25. And we hit equals. The value we get here is actually the spacing between the throat radius of the elbow and the first track radius. So this section of the formula right here that we're currently highlighting happens to be the difference between the throat radius and the track radius 1. So if we simply add 9 to whatever the radius is, in this particular exercise the radius is 27, that's going to tell us what the first track radius is. So we're going to take 9 and add the radius of the throat. That's going to give us the first track. The first track is 36 inches. And more importantly, it's 9 inches away from the throat. Now what we do to calculate the second track is all we do is actually take the spacing of what the first track was, which was 9. And we multiply that by 1 minus the radius ratio. For example, the radius ratio is 1/4. 1 minus 1/4 is 0.75. If you take 9 and you multiply it by 0.75, the value you get here, which is 6.75, should be the space between track 1 and track 2. So if you take 6.75 and add it to 36, which we're going to do in the calculator, plus 36, and hit equals, it's going to give you 42.75. That's the track radius 2. Now, once again, if you want to get track radius 3, you simply take the spacing between the first track and the second track and multiply it by your radius ratio. And you can see right here in the formula, we're going to start over just so you can watch it one more time how it's being calculated. You can see here that track 2 is going to be track 1 minus radius. That means track radius 36. We're going to put in 36. If we subtract the throat radius, which happens to be 27, so we're subtracting the first radius from the radius of the throat. So if we do that, we minus 27. It's telling us the spacing between these two is 9 inches. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say that this value is going to be 9 right here, track 1 to radius 1. This is also known as the spacing between the first two tracks, the throat and track 1. Well, if we take 9 and we multiply it by 1 minus our radius ratio, our radius ratio was 0.25. So 1 minus 0.25 equals 3/4 or 0.75. So what we have to do is we have to take this section, which is 0.75. We multiply it by the spacing between our first two vanes, which was calculated by this here. That happened to be 9, so we're going to say times 9. And that's going to give us 6.75. And what that is, what we're calculating in this section of the formula that we've got highlighted currently, is we're calculating the difference between vane 1 and vane 2. So what we do is we take this number, 6.75, we add it to the track radius 1, which you can see up here is 36. So we're going to add that to 36. And it's going to tell us that track radius 2 should be 42.75. So once again, if we now take track radius 2 and subtract it from track radius 1, it's going to give us the spacing between these vanes. We multiply that number by 0.75, which is 1 minus our radius ratio, and that's going to tell us the spacing we should have between track 2 and track 3. So we're going to go through that one more time. Now we're going to go to calculate track 3. Here what we do is we take track 2 and subtract it from track 1. So here you got the values, track 2, track 1. So we're going to take 42.75, which is the track radius 2, and we're going to subtract track radius 1, which is 36. That's telling us the spacing between these two tracks, 1 and 2. That is the number that would be generated from the formula we have highlighted here. Now we have to multiply that times 1 minus the radius ratio. Once again, the radius ratio is 0.25. 1 minus the radius ratio is going to be 0.75. So we multiply 6.75 times 0.75 and hit equals. That number here should be the distance between track 2 and track 3. So we simply add it to whatever track 2 radius is. So we're going to say plus 42.75. 42.75. If you hit equals, you can see you get 47.81. That is what PractiCAD had automatically calculated for track 3. Now what we're going to do is try to figure out what the fourth track radius would be if we were to add one. To do that, we're simply going to take the track 3 radius minus the track 2 radius to get the spacing between them. So we've already got track 3 in the calculator, 47.813. And now we're just going to subtract track 2, 42.75. So we're going to say minus 42.75. And here we're going to hit equals. And that's giving us the spacing between track 2 and track 3. We now need to take that spacing and multiply it times 1 minus our radius ratio. That number is 0.75. So if we say this number times 0.75 and hit equals, that is giving us the spacing between track 3 and track 4. You can see right here, track 4 equals, it says track 3 minus track 2. We did that already. times 1 minus the radius ratio. And that gives us this number right here. And all we need to do now is add that number, because that's the new spacing between track 3 and track 4. So we just add that number to track 3, 47.813. So we're going to put it in our calculator. And this number we get is going to be what we should have if in fact we go to do a fourth count, 51.610. And if we click count up, you can see 51.610. It would be rounded. So here's what we've got. The number is correct. We've calculated exactly what the fourth track would be utilizing the width proportional ratio. So these are the three methods we have: equal distance, radius proportional, and width proportional for automatically calculating the spacing between vanes. The last parameters we have in PractiCAD for radius vanes are manufacturing parameters: distance between holes, hole diameter, material, gauge of the blades, and lining allowance. These 5 parameters currently will have no bearing at all on the preview of your duct in PractiCAD, nor will these parameters download to PractiCam. They are strictly here for consistency and because you are capable of reporting these parameters in PractiCAD. But it will not make a difference in terms of drawing what you choose here. And if you are not reporting these manufacturing parameters from PractiCAD, there is no reason to put any values in here whatsoever. All of this data should already be preset in your PractiCam. For example, here you can see we are in the accessories section in My Libraries in PractiCam, and you can see the parameters here: distance between holes, hole diameter, material, gauge, and lining allowance. Regardless of what you put inside those fields in PractiCAD, when PractiCAD goes to download a vane type from CAD to CAM, PractiCam is simply going to look for the name of the vane, match it up with one of the names we have here, and then it's going to utilize those parameters that are already set in PractiCam. If you're not using PractiCam, those parameters won't make a difference. If you are using PractiCam, the correct thing to do would be to design your vane here first and then import it into PractiCAD. So those parameters are just there for reporting purposes in PractiCAD, also so you know exactly what type of data is inside your PractiCam. They should match, but it will not have any effect. That'll conclude the tutorial on how to create a radius vane.